Good afternoon, everyone, and have a wonderful Thursday. I hope you're all doing great and that your day is off to an amazing start filled with good health, peace, and plenty of positive moments. The Detroit Lions preseason is heating up, expectations for this team continue to rise, and today we have some important updates that every Lions fan needs to hear. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're not already part of our community, and turn on notifications so you never miss any Detroit Lions news. Now, without further ado, let's get right into today's biggest headlines and the latest updates surrounding the Detroit Lions. The biggest development surrounding the Detroit Lions right now is finally moving in the direction every fan was hoping for, and the timing could not be better. After days of speculation, questions, and growing conversations around the future of Jahmyr Gibbs, there is now real optimism that his contract situation is about to be resolved. According to the information discussed, the expectation inside the organization is that everything will be taken care of this week, and Brad Holmes himself expressed confidence that the process is moving exactly where everyone expected it to go. That alone is huge news for Detroit because over the last several days, the conversation had started drifting away from football and toward contract concerns. Instead of focusing on preparations for the season, many fans were wondering whether Gibbs' absence from practice should be treated as a warning sign. But based on everything that was presented, there is no indication that this is turning into a long-term distraction. The belief is that both sides are working toward the same outcome, and that outcome has never really changed. The Lions want Gibbs in Detroit, and Gibbs is expected to remain one of the centerpieces of this offense. At the same time, there was another piece of encouraging news that deserves attention because it directly affects the depth of this football team. Tyler Conklin has officially returned to practice. Considering how often Lions fans have had to deal with injury updates over the past several seasons, finally talking about someone returning instead of leaving the field is a refreshing change. Even though expectations should remain realistic as he eases back into action, simply seeing him back with the team is an important step forward. The interesting part now becomes the competition inside the tight end room. Nobody is suggesting that Sam LaPorta's position is under any kind of threat. That isn't the discussion at all. Instead, the focus shifts toward the battle for the supporting roles behind him. Conklin brings experience and, perhaps more importantly, the type of blocking ability that can become extremely valuable in Detroit's offensive system. That was highlighted as one of his biggest strengths, making him a legitimate competitor for snaps as the coaching staff evaluates the depth chart throughout camp. Another point that stood out is that this return is not simply about having another healthy body available. The expectation is that Conklin was brought in to contribute, not to spend training camp watching from the sidelines. The organization invested in him because they believe he can help this offense, and now he finally gets the opportunity to prove exactly where he fits. While he may not immediately receive a full workload after returning, simply getting back onto the practice field allows the coaching staff to begin evaluating how quickly he can become part of the regular rotation. Meanwhile, the conversation surrounding Gibbs has become far more emotional than many expected. Some criticism has been directed toward the player, while others have questioned the organization, but the explanation offered paints a much calmer picture. From a player's perspective, protecting a contract that could change the rest of his career is simply common sense. If a player is only days away from signing a massive extension, risking a serious injury before that agreement becomes official could have enormous consequences. That viewpoint suggests this situation is much more about protecting a financial future than creating conflict with the franchise. The confidence surrounding the negotiations also appears to come from Detroit's recent history. One of the strongest arguments presented is that Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell have consistently shown a willingness to reward the players they believe in, rather than aggressively chasing every available free agent each offseason. The Lions have established a reputation for investing in the talent they drafted and developed themselves. That philosophy has become one of the defining characteristics of this front office, making it difficult to believe that Gibbs would somehow become the exception. That consistency is exactly why the current situation may not deserve the level of panic it created. Negotiations involving contracts worth tens of millions of dollars are naturally complicated. Documents have to be finalized, details have to be reviewed, and both sides have to make sure every part of the agreement is correct before signatures are placed on paper. According to the discussion, taking several extra days days to complete that process should not automatically be interpreted as a problem between the player and the organization. Brad Holmes also reinforced the organization's approach by explaining that there has been ongoing dialogue regarding Gibbs, while reiterating the Lions' belief in maintaining a strong running back duo. Rather than suggesting negotiations had broken down, his comments reflected confidence that discussions were continuing and that reaching an agreement remained the expectation. When you combine the optimism surrounding Gibbs' extension with Tyler Conklin's return to practice, this suddenly becomes one of the most encouraging stretches of news Lions fans have received recently. Instead of another day dominated by injuries or setbacks, Detroit appears to be moving toward getting one important player back on the field, while also moving another one closer to securing his long-term future with the franchise. But here's the question every Lions fan should be thinking about right now. If Jahmyr Gibbs signs his extension this week as expected and Tyler Conklin begins making progress back into the offense, how much confidence does that give you heading into the rest of training camp? The reason this entire situation has generated so much discussion is because expectations are incredibly high for the Detroit Lions this season, and Jahmyr Gibbs is expected to be one of the players carrying a massive share of that responsibility. That's exactly why the idea of him missing a handful of practices immediately became headline material. But when you step back and look at everything that has been said, the bigger picture becomes much clearer. There has never been any indication that Detroit suddenly changed its philosophy regarding its own stars. Quite the opposite. The front office continues to operate the same way it has for years, rewarding the players it believes are part of the organization's future. That consistency matters because organizations build reputations over time. Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell have repeatedly emphasized that they believe in keeping the core of this roster together instead of constantly looking outside the building for solutions. According to the discussion, that approach has already been proven through previous contract decisions, and there is no reason to believe it suddenly changes with one of the most explosive offensive players in football. One of the strongest points raised is how quickly people can jump to conclusions during training camp. A player misses a few practices, social media immediately starts creating theories, national personalities begin questioning the organization, and before long it feels like there is a crisis. But the perspective presented here argues that this situation never reached that level. Instead, it was simply the normal process of finalizing an enormous financial commitment that requires both sides to carefully review every detail before making it official. Think about the size of the investment being discussed. These are contracts worth tens of millions of dollars annually. Agreements like these are not completed in a matter of hours. Every document has to be reviewed, every clause has to be finalized, every financial detail has to be agreed upon. The comparison made was that even purchasing something much smaller, like a home, often takes longer than expected despite both parties wanting the exact same outcome. The point is that delays alone should not automatically be interpreted as disagreement. Sometimes the process simply takes time. Another important part of this conversation focuses on the player himself. From Jahmyr Gibbs' perspective, protecting his future before signing a life-changing extension is completely understandable. If there is even a small possibility of suffering a major injury just days before finalizing a new contract, avoiding unnecessary risk becomes a logical decision. The discussion argues that almost anyone placed in that situation would likely make the same choice, especially considering what is potentially waiting at the end of these negotiations. At the same time, the Lions are not standing still while these conversations continue. Tyler Conklin's return gives the coaching staff another player to evaluate as training camp moves forward. Although expectations should remain measured while he works his way back, his presence creates another interesting storyline inside an offense that continues trying to strengthen every position group. His blocking ability was highlighted as one of the biggest reasons he could carve out a meaningful role behind Sam LaPorta, and now he finally has the opportunity to demonstrate exactly what he can offer once fully healthy. Perhaps the most reassuring part of everything discussed is the overall confidence coming from inside the organization. Brad Holmes did not sound like someone dealing with a major contract standoff. Instead, he spoke about ongoing dialogue and expressed hope that the process would reach the expected conclusion. That confidence matches the optimism reported around the negotiations, making it difficult to view this as anything more than a temporary step before an agreement is officially announced. And if that happens exactly as expected, this conversation could disappear almost as quickly as it started. The focus would immediately shift back to football, back to preparing for the season, and back to watching one of the NFL's most dynamic playmakers return to doing what he does best: For a team entering such an important year, eliminating distractions before the regular season begins is exactly the outcome Detroit has been working toward. The reality is that the Lions appear to be staying true to the blueprint that has defined this front office. They continue investing in their own talent, they continue showing patience during major negotiations, and they continue building around players they believe can help bring sustained success to Detroit. If everything unfolds the way the current expectations suggest, this story may soon be remembered not as a controversy, but simply as another contract that required a little more time before reaching the finish line. The next thing that really stands out is the perspective on why this situation escalated far beyond what it probably deserved. From the discussion, the belief is that people reacted emotionally instead of looking at the Lions' recent history. Detroit has spent years building trust with its roster by showing that when they believe a player is part of their long-term vision, they eventually get the deal done. That philosophy hasn't suddenly changed because one negotiation lasted a few extra days. Instead, the argument is that fans should judge the organization based on its track record rather than the headlines being created during a single week of training camp.